But today we have a second lecture in our new lecture series, which is dedicated to Estonians who are global Estonians, who have been traveling or living in different countries and have different experiences from different places. And at the first lecture we had two very beautiful young ladies from Toronto Estonian community talking about their experiences in Paris and in Ecuador. And today we have here Linnea Mayfield. And all Estonians know that she's a daughter of Tiina Kirs, who is one of our beloved lecturers here. So we have high expectations, Linnea. But Linnea is in a different field. She's not doing research on literature or culture. She's more into sciences. So she's studying biology in US right now, but she graduated from the high school in Estonia. And those are some of the things she's going to talk tonight. And now, please, Linnea, floor is yours, and please tell more about yourself.
Hello. So, as Piret said, my name is Linnea Mayfield. I'm a daughter of Tiina Kirs. And currently, I am in my third year at Wheaton College, which is located in Norton, Massachusetts, about 45 minutes away from Boston. But today, I'm going to talk more about my high school education in Tartu, Estonia, and also about my travels in New Zealand, where I spent a study abroad semester last semester. So, to start, Eesti, Estonia. So this is the town hall of Tartu, where I sort of grew up and lived during my high school years. Nice cornflowers, just to illustrate Estonia. So my family moved to Tartu in 2006 when I was in 6th grade, and I started attending Tartu Waldorf School, also known as Tartu Waldorf Gymnasium, which I really loved. It doesn't have the most shining reputation in Estonia because it's a slightly misunderstood school, but I think it was really great. In general, school in Estonia is very, very hard. It's academically extremely rigorous, and it's wonderful preparation for university if you choose to go on to do so. High school and university are both optional in Estonia. They're not mandatory like high school is in Canada. So a lot of people choose after 9th grade to go to vocational school to study something else. I did not. I went on to high school, and I attended TVG, as I said. So a couple things about education in Estonia. In grade 9 and 12, you take exams at the end of your year. Grade 9, it's kind of your entrance into society, and in grade 12, it's preparation for university. In 9th grade, you have 3 exams, but in 12th grade, when I was still in high school, you had to take 5 exams, and they were brutal. You had to take Estonian, which was a 6-hour essay exam, and then that was followed by 4 elective exams, for which I took biology, math, geography, and English. English, I was kind of cheating, but that's okay. It was kind of a funny system because you only needed 20 points to pass, but even those 20 points could be pretty difficult to attain. So some particulars about my school. This is Tartu. Not my school, though. That's me in the blue dress for my high school graduation. Some particulars about TVG. It follows the Waldorf curriculum and educational philosophy, which includes a lot of one-on-one time with students and teachers, and emphasizes strongly the arts. So we had, for example, a bunch of very different art classes. In addition to drawing and painting, we had glasswork, so we would make stained glass windows and borders for mirrors and such. And then we also had woodwork, knitting, basket weaving, bookbinding, and clay work. So we got to do a lot of practical things with our hands, which was a really nice change from just academic work. In addition to that, Waldorf schools do not offer electives, so you have to take all of your subjects through all 3 years of high school. which was actually really great because it kind of gives you a Renaissance perspective. You get to have a very broad education. So that was, I really enjoyed that because it did prepare me for further study. Another fun thing about school in Estonia, which is a pretty general thing, is that you're served a warm lunch every day, which was a really nice change from cold thermoses when I was in Canada. For most of my experience, the food was impeccable. It was very Estonian-centric, very classic Estonian dishes, and I loved it. It was really great. A typical school day would start at 8:15 a.m. and end at 3:30 p.m., which in the winters was a pretty rough time schedule because you missed all of the days, or all of the hours of daylight, because it was very dark. So, gymnastics. When I was in Estonia, I did rhythmic gymnastics, just like I did here. And I was very lucky to have chosen a sport at a young age that was analogous in both countries, because I got to continue it regardless of where I lived, which was great. So during high school and middle school, I would go 4 days a week for 2 hours, with 3 hours, I think, on Wednesdays when we had an additional ballet class. And it was difficult, again. Much like education, rhythmic gymnastics is not a joke in Estonia, and it is approached with a sort of drill sergeant attitude. It's very for the win. That's the kind of goal of doing gymnastics. Is here I kind of loved the attitude that my coach had, where it was more fun and everyone was having a good time and we were a family, but here it was kind of every man for themselves, or woman I should say, and everyone was working towards winning as opposed to just having a good time. But it did teach me a lot of discipline, so I really appreciated that. Rhythmic gymnastics is the most popular sport in Estonia. Everyone knows about it, and every year Jaanika Mölder, who many of you may know, hosts Miss Valentine competition, where gymnasts from all over the world come to perform and compete for a very prestigious award. I really enjoyed that when I told people that I was a rhythmic gymnast, they would say, "Oh my gosh, wow, you're a real athlete." Whereas here it's kind of unknown. There it's on par, if not higher, than soccer players and basketball players, because everyone knows how difficult it is and how taxing it is on the body and how much time we put into it. So that was fun. Gym class at school was very easy for me because I was in impeccable shape, and every time we had acrobatics units, my teacher would just say, "Okay, just do part of your routine and you're done. Get your A." So that was really nice. In addition to being very popular, it's also, and very well known, it's also highly regarded. So people are very proud of Estonia's leading position on the global ranking scale. A couple years ago, when I was back home, still in high school, I guess it was more than a couple of years, there was the World Cup hosted in Tartu, and I went to watch it, and it was absolutely incredible. And I'm pretty sure that the joint Jaanika and, I forget, pirouette team, I think, for Estonia got second place with a really amazing routine. So that was a sight to behold. People and culture. So if you don't know, that is the First Lady of Estonia. When I was back in Estonia last, after my first year at university, I went to Kihnu, where they had the Kihnu Sea Days, which was a big festival. Kihnu is an island, very small island, a really fun island. And so the president and his wife came to visit for the festivities, and it was really cool. It was cool to see the First Lady, because I'd met her once before, but it goes to show how small the country is, which is great. Speaking of the people, they are very contemporary, for lack of a better word. They love to travel. They're incredibly curious, even today. Everyone wants to go and see places and do things. And they're also adapting really, really well to global change. So a lot of Estonians speak really great English. I recently saw a map on Facebook that said that Estonia was one of the European countries with the highest English proficiency per capita, or per person. So that was really interesting to see. When I was still in high school, it was kind of scary and a little bit strange to hear a lot of Anglicisms finding their way into the language, and people were worried about the language disappearing. But I don't think that that is as much of a problem today because music is a big deal in the younger crowds, and bands like Curly Strings, who performed here, are really helping to kind of bring the two cultures together, so bring the Anglophilia, I guess, and the Estonian language, and also aspects of Estonian culture together, which I think is kind of leading to a sort of revival of the culture itself. So in addition to big bands like Curly Strings and Evert and the Two Dragons, there are also the ever-present song festivals and folk festivals. So this is a picture of the Viljandi Folk that I went to also a couple of years ago, where my brother is on stage performing with a youth camp called Eesti Etno, which is an ethnic music camp where students from all over Europe come together and perform and learn songs from different countries, and they have a really great time, so that was very interesting. This is the very famous dance party, also called the Tantsupito, that I also was fortunate enough to get to see. It was absolutely incredible, and I definitely recommend going to see it if you ever are in Eesti during that time. And there's also the Song Festival, which happened that year. This was my first song festival that I had ever been to, and it lived up to its name of being an incredible experience. So another issue that is facing modern Estonians right now is a lot of people are leaving Estonia for work and for study, mostly because of the job market and wages. Estonia is a very successful country right now on the global scale, which is incredible for such a small country. But the downside of that is that it has a depressive effect on the population because it diminishes wages for the population. Some kind of day-to-day things, most Estonians don't go out to eat. So like in Toronto, for example, if you're looking for something to eat for lunch, you'd pop by and grab a sushi or something. But in Estonia, that's not the case. Everyone eats at home because going out is expensive. But on the other hand, most necessities, such as milk and dairy products, are very cheap compared to Canadian prices. So there's kind of a comparison there. Also, social support is very, very, very good. Until the age of 18, you can get all of medical expenses, including any kind of dental work you need to get done for free, which is amazing. And the state usually helps to pay for any kinds of surgeries or specialist visits that you need, so that's great. But it is hard for people to find jobs, and also the price of living is high, so it is difficult for most of the population at this point. But we're hoping for improvement soon. Another cool thing about Estonians is that they're very technologically savvy. I do not fit into that bracket personally, but most Estonians are. For example, Skype. They're the accredited inventors of Skype, which is pretty cool because everyone uses Skype. Alrighty. So that's just another picture of some Kihnu art that I saw while visiting the Kihnu Cultural Center a couple of years ago. Everything is covered in stripes in Kihnu. Climate. Many of you who have visited Estonia know that it is cold in the winter, very, very cold in the winter. They can be kind of shifty. I've heard in the last couple of years that they haven't been typical winters, but this is a year where we had a lot of snow and it was freezing. Sometimes the temperature can get as low as below -30, which is not fun to go into school in. In fact, one year I wore 4 pairs of pants trying to keep warm in the winter, and I did not succeed very well. In the summer, though, this happens. So the whole country explodes in color, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And the days are very, very long, which is really nice. And my favorite part, personally, is all of the produce that comes flooding in, usually by about late June, mid to late June. And the markets that open up every single day really early in the morning, and you can go and buy tons of strawberries, which are a favorite for sure. Yep. So with that, I conclude Estonia. That's a picture from our window at my last home in Estonia. So that was a nice wintry view. So now to New Zealand. So kia ora, Aotearoa, or New Zealand. Kia ora means hello or welcome in Te Reo Maori, which is the second official language of 3 in New Zealand. And Aotearoa is the Maori word or name for New Zealand, which means land of the long white cloud, because the first Polynesian ship to find New Zealand saw a long white cloud on the horizon and knew they were near land, which was really great because they had traveled a long way. So I went to New Zealand. I went to Christchurch, which is on the South Island, if you can see right above the word South. I went to study abroad for a semester through my school's program for studying abroad. And I spent 4 months there having an absolute blast. Christchurch is the city that I lived in. That on the left-hand side is called the Victory Cone. It's right in the middle of town square, and next to it are a bunch of shipping containers. And the shipping containers are have kind of dual symbolism in New Zealand right now. Christchurch was devastated by earthquakes in 2012 that they're still trying to recover from. And if you can see in the background of the left-hand picture, that's the Christchurch Cathedral, which is very, very, well, almost as old as Christchurch itself, but was torn apart during the earthquakes. So they're trying to figure out what to do with that. That's kind of in a flux right now. But the center of the city was hit the hardest. One of the highest buildings was knocked over, and there were a bunch of casualties, which is really upsetting. But Christchurch is dealing with the damages in a very inventive way and incorporating the shipping containers into buildings. So one of the examples of that is they built Restart Mall, which is all of the shops are shops that were previously in a shopping center that was torn down, and they are now made entirely out of shipping containers. So it's a really fun place to visit. It's very colorful. Christchurch is also known as the Garden City because a lot of gardeners from England moved there and felt nostalgic for all of the color that they had seen before and decided to bring a lot of flowers with them. So the Botanic Gardens are singularly amazing. I went there a bunch of times and really enjoyed the view, such as these beautiful flowers. University of Canterbury is the place that I studied. It is one of the largest universities in New Zealand. And I chose to go there because of its unique location between the mountains and the sea. So on the east coast, it's located right on the east coast, so it's not more than 45 minutes from the water, and it's also not more than 45 minutes from the Port Hills, which are kind of the introduction to the Southern Alps. And being a biology student, I was very interested in all of the different critters I could see between those two environments, and I decided that it would be a good idea to go there. I just decided to put this picture of my room, which was in Ilam Apartments, which is a student village, and a triceratops, which I have an affinity for. That is a view of Kirkwood Village, which were outbuildings that were constructed after a part of the university's campus was hit during the earthquakes. So there's a beautiful vista up on the hill. You can see the Port Hills in the background, which I love to watch during the sunset. Speaking of New Zealand, one of the most interesting aspects of my time in New Zealand was just getting there. It's very bizarre to cross over the international date line because I've heard it be equated to time travel. On the way there, you don't exist for a day. So I left from Los Angeles on July 5th, and I arrived in Auckland, which was my first stop in New Zealand, on July 7th. So there was just a day that just didn't happen for me. And on the way back, I kind of gained that day back in a very bizarre fashion, where I arrived back in Los Angeles before I had ever left Christchurch, about 6 hours before to be exact, which was very strange. So, some more about the university. I took 4 classes, which is a general load for a university student for a typical year. I took 2 biology courses, a course on Antarctica and one entitled Science, Maori, and Indigenous Knowledge, which compares and contrasts Western scientific thought with Maori scientific methods and life ways. So it kind of gives you an idea of how the indigenous people lived when they first arrived in New Zealand and how that compares to what Westerners brought over from the old country. I really enjoyed this class the most because it was truly New Zealand. It taught me so much about the environment. It taught me so much about how the people thought and how relationships were between Maori and Pakeha, which is European New Zealanders. So one of my favorite units that we had in this class was titled How to Survive in the Bush. And in this class, we learned about all of the different plants that were edible or useful in the bush. So if we ever got lost hiking, we could figure out what to do. So some of the things we learned were pepper bushes. We could pick off leaves if we had a toothache randomly in the bush, or how to make a perfume out of a certain leaf that you could just take off the tree and crush in your hands, or mix it into water and turn it into an energy drink. And my personal favorite was there was a tree called the lacewood that you could just pull off the leaves and strip them, and you had shoelaces. So that was a very interesting tree to be looking at. We also took a 3-day field trip to my absolute favorite place in New Zealand. This is another view of the campus. Everyone rides a bike. To this place, which is Kaikoura. It's located 2.5 hours north of Christchurch along the coast, and it is an absolutely stunning place to visit. Though, as you can see in the background on the left-hand picture, the mountains just drop straight into the water. So there are these incredible views, and also a lot of really cool wildlife, like the seals and all kinds of whales and such. So when we went to Kaikoura, we stayed on the local tribe's land. So we stayed on their marae, which is called the village, and we stayed in their wharenui, which is the big house or the central gathering place, which is adorned with absolutely stunning carvings inside, but unfortunately we were not allowed to take pictures while we were there, so I can't show them to you today. But I can tell you for a fact that they were absolutely gorgeous, and they were really interesting to look at night when you were sleeping on the floor and you look up and you just see these amazing carvings. So the point of our field trip was to participate in a Paua or Abalone tagging and reseeding project, which has been ongoing for the last 3 years. So the local tribe still uses and cultivates abalone as a central food source. So people make their living off harvesting these, and our job was to collect them, collect juveniles, tag them with super glue, which I tagged myself many times, and then return them to the water. So it's not the greatest picture, but those are some of the abalone that we reseeded. And the point of tagging them was to track their progress and see how large they get and how many they could recover in the next couple of years so that they could monitor sustainable harvest. Also, while in Kaikoura, we got to do a whale watching trip, which for me was kind of a life-altering experience because I've always been very interested in marine biology, but this experience solidified my decision to further my study in the field. And this is a sperm whale. His name is Mati Mati, and he is the senior male who kind of sticks around the area most of the year. That was amazing. The swell was pretty intense, and we had a lot of seasick passengers that day, but it was a wonderful experience overall. So something about the society and the culture, rugby. Rugby is a very, very big deal in New Zealand. The New Zealand All Blacks won this year's Rugby World Cup, which was incredible, and I woke up at 4:30 in the morning to go and watch the game. I didn't see it in person, but I got to watch it on TV. It was a really stunning experience. They are a powerhouse team, and I probably am now a lifelong rugby fan because of it. Everyone, every day that it's nice out, you'll see people throwing rugby balls around, and it's really great. But my personal favorite part about rugby, or at least the All Blacks, is that at the beginning of every game that they play, they try to intimidate their opponent team by performing a Maori war dance called the haka. So it's extremely powerful and very exciting, and it often works. People get a little bit scared. I did have a video, but I don't think that it's going to play, so I'll just keep on moving. Travels in New Zealand. So before I hit travels, I will talk a little bit more about the society. New Zealand has a bicultural society, which means that both Pākehā, which, just to reiterate, is the European New Zealander population, and the Maori are represented equally in all aspects of government. They're in a partnership that was outlined, that they have kind of revived from the Treaty of Waitangi, which was their first treaty between the British Crown and the Maori people. This was supposed to be a peace treaty at the beginning of the European settlement, but quickly disintegrated and has now been revived starting in the 1960s. New Zealand has 3 official languages: Te Reo Maori, which is the indigenous language, New Zealand Sign Language, and English. So that was very interesting for me to learn. I didn't know that New Zealand Sign Language was a third official language, but it was. Also, just something about all New Zealanders, also known as Kiwis. They are the kindest people that you will ever meet, or I have ever met. They are absolutely amazing. They are so welcoming and ready to help you with any kinds of problems you ever may have. So I was never worried about traveling in New Zealand by myself. So during my mid-semester break, which was about 2 weeks, at the end of August and the beginning of September, I traveled around the North Island alone for 7 days, and it was a new experience for me, for sure. I've never traveled completely by myself, but I thoroughly enjoyed myself. So this is Sumner Beach, where I did a hike with a bunch of my friends. This is still near Christchurch, about 45 minutes away from my campus. And this is also Sumner Beach. We got lucky. It was a beautiful day, even though it was still winter. People were swimming. This was a beach also in Sumner that we hiked to that was kind of in a cove, and it's a volcanic black sand beach that was really incredible to see. And this was on my way to Wellington, which is the capital of New Zealand. I got to fly over the Southern Alps, and because it was such a short flight, they were flying very low, so I could take a lot of really amazing pictures on the way there. This is Wellington. Wellington was one of my favorite cities, apart from Christchurch. Christchurch was my home, so I was a little biased. But Wellington is the capital where the Beehive Parliament Building is, and it's also the home of the New Zealand museum called Te Papa. This is the first picture on the left is a view from the window of Te Papa out onto the bay. And the second picture is the Wellington cable car, which takes you up about 250 meters in 5 minutes. So it was very interesting to ride on there and then walk down through the Botanic Gardens, which can't really rival the Christchurch Botanic Gardens, but close enough. After visiting Wellington, I went to Auckland, where I spent a couple of days seeing the city. So that is the Sky Tower on the lower picture. And I also visited one of the many islands in the bay, which is called Rangitoto Island, which is an entirely volcanic island and is home to a number of very interesting creatures, including skinks, which are strange little lizards, and lots of birds. So that was a really fun experience to get to see a lot of native New Zealand birds. From there, I went on to Waitomo, which is home to the infamous, at least in New Zealand, Glowworm Caves. And unfortunately, I was unable to take pictures inside the Glowworm Caves either because they disturb the glowworms and their lights will just go out. But when you look up at the ceiling of the cave, you can see thousands of little blue lights like stars. So that was a really incredible experience. From there, I went on to the famous Mara, or Hobbiton, where they filmed the Hobbit movies and also the Lord of the Rings movies. This is a picture of the Green Dragon. Anyone familiar with the movies will know that this is the pub. And it was great because they offered you free food and drink when you took a tour of Mara. Some Hobbit Holes. I was sad to learn that the Hobbit Holes actually do not have anything in them. They just stretch back a couple of meters of dirt. So can't really go inside, but it was still neat to see. This is actually a really funny cart that they have parked outside one of the Hobbit Holes. Every day someone bakes something or brings something new and switches it out. And so people try to walk by and try to take something, but they always have someone standing there to make sure that nobody does. New Zealand, I can't talk about it without talking about the sheep. There are more sheep than people in New Zealand, and it becomes incredibly evident as soon as you leave a city. I was in New Zealand in early spring when the sheep were lambing, so we got to see a bunch of them scattered across with little lambs running around and being really adorable. Many times we heard people talk to drivers in the bus and say, "Can we stop for a second? I just want to take a picture. I promise I won't take one." So that's a common thing. People want to take lambs when they're just born and raise them into sheep. This is an example of some of the pretty incredible plant life in New Zealand. There are some really weird plants there. One of the strangest things I saw was when I first arrived, there was snow on the ground and palm trees, which seemed a little bit counterintuitive, but it was absolutely incredible. It was also one of the first things I noticed was I thought it was raining the first night that I got there, but I actually just had 3 nikau palms right outside my window that would rush their leaves together when the wind blew, so that sounded like rain. It's really nice. Coffee. New Zealanders love their coffee, but they only love espresso drinks, and they are the inventors of the flat white. So I drank many of those in my time in New Zealand and enjoyed them every time. A little bit more about the climate and the wildlife. There are 3 kinds of kiwis in New Zealand. The birds, which are called kiwi birds, kiwi fruit, which are the fruit, and kiwi people. So some would say that even the kiwi people are wildlife, but that's debatable. These are 3 things that should not be mixed up, because if you say, "Oh my gosh, I ate a kiwi today," people will say, "Are you a cannibal?" That's not something you really want to have on your reputation. Kiwi birds are adorable. Unfortunately, I didn't see any because they are highly endangered and exist only in wildlife reserves at this time. In addition to kiwis, there are some pretty cool birds called pukekos, which run around and are just silly. They are not the most intelligent birds, but they are pretty fun to look at. There are also kias, which are very naughty. I unfortunately, again, didn't see any, but a bunch of my friends did. They're in the kind of higher altitudes, and they will come and steal everything that you have. If you have a car, they will come and try to steal the windshield wipers off your car. So everyone is very careful when they are around kias. New Zealand is truly an island of birds. It has incredible biodiversity in terms of birds, not only because they're naturally there, but also because there are a lot of introduced species that people brought for nostalgic reasons, just like the flowers for everyone's gardens. That was one of the first things I actually noticed when I first got to New Zealand was the difference in the dawn chorus in the morning. It was just completely different from North America or Europe. The sounds were very amazing and just completely, none of the chitter chatter that I would hear on a normal day in spring in Estonia, for example. Something that's very interesting and a little shocking, one of the most invasive species is the Australian brush-tailed possum, which is very prevalent, unfortunately, and preys on birds and bird nests, and which is part of the reason why kiwis are in decline. And what's shocking about them is any kiwi person that you go out with into the bush if you're hiking, if they see a possum, they will kill it immediately. They will chase after it, and they will find it, and they will kill it because they don't want them proliferating anymore. New Zealand is a temperate region. The east coast where I was very nice because it was very, very dry, so no humid hair, which was great. There's very little rain, so the first snow that I saw there was actually a shocker for everyone in New Zealand because it doesn't usually snow on the east coast. And that's because the southern Alps stretch from the tip of the South Island all the way up to the North Island and cause a rain shadow effect, so the east coast is shielded from a lot of the rain. The west coast is known for their mountains, their rivers, and also what I have around my neck today, pounamu, which is greenstone. And greenstone is a very sacred stone for Maori. It's very tough and difficult to work, and that's why it's sacred, because it can be used for tools, it can be used as weapons, and it's also known or thought to possess a very sacred spirit. So that was an interesting thing to learn about in part of my Maori class. It's also, I should probably talk about how different it is to be in New Zealand when it's November and it gets warm outside. That was definitely a shocker for me. Summer and winter are flipped, as you would expect in the southern hemisphere, which was a new thing for me. I was expecting to be going into fall because it was the start of the school year, but instead I was going into their second semester of the year and going into summer. So it was absolutely beautiful. The weather was very mild for most of my visit, and it was a welcome change from a Massachusetts winter where last year we were hit with a blizzard, bringing 6 feet of snow. So that was a nice change. Some other random little trivia points. I think that's the last of my slides, yep. New Zealanders not only love their coffee, they also love their tea, and they're very good at making tea, much like Great Britain. And they also love their chocolate. So I recently found out that one of the stores here in Toronto carries my New Zealand chocolate, which made me very happy. I ate copious amounts of it and was very happy with it. And on top of that, one thing that makes many overage students very happy is that most alcohol in New Zealand costs less than bottled water and less than juice. So it is very easy to obtain and causes many loud evenings, I guess I could say. Another interesting thing that I faced on my first day entering New Zealand was their strictness about biosecurity. So New Zealanders are very careful with what they have. They are very conscious of the biodiversity and how unique it is, and they check everything. So if you're coming in and you've been anywhere with shoes on, they will check your shoes, and if they're not clean enough, then you have to go and stand in line for an hour and have them sanitized. I almost missed my second flight to Christchurch because I had winter boots with me and I was unaware of the fact that they needed to be sanitized, but luckily I got waved through, which was a huge relief. Another thing that I wish I had known prior to going was luggage limits. Carry-on luggage is 7 kilos, and when they say 7 kilos, they mean 7 kilos. They will make you pay an exorbitant fine if you do not have 7 kilos in your carry-on luggage. So just in case anyone ever wants to go to New Zealand, bear that in mind. On top of that, a little bit more about my studies. My second favorite class was my Antarctica class, where we discussed all aspects of Antarctica, from tourism and how that impacts the environment to the environment itself. And I thoroughly enjoyed the class because it was so different from anything I would have learned anywhere else. And Christchurch is actually one of the places where you deploy for missions to Scott Base, which is the New Zealand station down in Antarctica. And for my further study, I hope to be able to be one of the people to be sent down there for a postgraduate degree. So that is my conclusion. I advise everyone to go to New Zealand if you can. It's an incredible country.
Aitäh. So, questions, comments? Who have been to New Zealand? No one? Yeah?
I want to know about the aftermath of this earthquake they had in this.
The aftermath?
You were there or you were not?
I was not there during the earthquakes, but I saw a lot of the devastation that they caused, because as soon as you drive into the central city, you can see that there are just these giant areas that are cordoned off, that are being renovated or just cleaned up, because they still have a lot of cleaning up to do there. But while I was there on my first night, actually, there was an earthquake, but it was very minor. It did wake me up, but there was nothing to be worried about, so that was interesting. A lot of things happened right at the beginning that were a little bit disconcerting, I would say, such as an earthquake.
Anybody worried if it happens again?
Yeah, everyone is actually worried about it, but they know that they're much better prepared now, because New Zealand is actually situated along 2 fault lines, a subduction zone and a separation zone. So that's why a lot of it is volcanic, but also leads to a lot of earthquakes and tsunamis, which I was shocked to learn about because I didn't think tsunamis happened in that part of the world. I would love to live there. I've heard, I was kind of a little bit skeptical at first, because I had heard from everyone who had ever been there that, oh my gosh, I want to go back and live there. And I was thinking, maybe it's a little overrated, but no, for sure. If I could live there for even a couple of years, I would be very happy.
Living in Estonia.
I would like to live in Estonia again too. I enjoyed living in Estonia. It was a very different experience, especially coming from a place like Canada, where everything is very diverse and just more cosmopolitan at the time. When I first moved to Estonia, it was still, you could see the Soviet influence even though it was years and years after. My schoolhouse, for example, was an old Soviet building, so that was kind of a reminder every day of where Estonia was, but it's come a long way since then, and I think that I would love to go back and see the progress that's been made since I was there last.
3 places, where would you like to live the most?
It's a tough question. I think that I would still, this is going to sound funny, but I would probably still end up in Canada or even in Toronto, because Toronto seems to be a go-between between the States, where I've lived for a few years now and was actually born, and Estonia, or like kind of, it has more European influence. And New Zealand kind of fits the bill with Toronto and with Canada in general, just because of its diversity and because of the different cultural influences. But I think that because Canada and Toronto especially is kind of a central place and where I spent many of my formative years in elementary school, I think it's still the place that I'm going to end up eventually.
Did you meet any Estonians at all?
I didn't, which was funny. I was shocked, actually. I thought that there were going to be a lot more. I do know of a few people who do live there who are Estonian, but I didn't get to visit with them at all because I don't know if anyone knows Liivi Kasak-James. She's an Estonian. Yeah, she lives in Nelson, which is right at the northern tip of the South Island. But by the time she was back at home, I was leaving, so I didn't get a chance to visit her. But yeah, I was shocked that I didn't run into any Estonians by chance. Something I'll have to aim for next time.
The glowworm thing really caught my attention. When I grew up in the States, and we had lightning bugs, and this summer when I was in Estonia, and it was jaanipäev, and it's like, oh, let's go now, and let's walk here, and you'll see. And I thought, oh yeah, we've had too much to drink. They're making this up. I'm just surprised that I'd never seen them before. But lo and behold, as we were walking around, they were on the ground though, not above. So is this a seasonal thing there, or because you said you went to a special place?
Yeah.
So are they there all the time, or is it just seasonal?
They are there all the time. They have a very long life cycle, the ones that live in New Zealand. I'm drawing a blank. I think it's a 2-year life cycle. And they spent the bulk of it in the larval stage, where they tunnel themselves into the roofs of the caves and kind of light up, and they catch bugs by attracting them through their light. And when they become adults, then they flutter down from their little perches and complete their life cycle that way. And then the next generation is already kind of installed and ready. So they're pretty much there all the time.
In Estonia, is it just in that summer period?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In Estonia, they, I know way too much about glowworms. I shouldn't know this much, but they have a shorter life cycle, and during the winter, they are in eggs, unhatched eggs, and they emerge as full adults, kind of in the summer. So they complete their larval stage in the spring, get all nice and fattened up, and then they come out in the summer, in late summer.
Actually, I told Linnea that there is a very exciting book written by a young Estonian guy, Martin Karu. The title is Täna on täna, and Forever is forever. It's about a young guy or girl. It's not even sure who he or she is. And let's say he, maybe. It sounded more like he. The name is tricky, so you can't tell. And Estonian grammar doesn't help because we don't have he and she. That's just tema. And he ended up in Wellington, New Zealand. So at least half of the book, everything what's happening, it's happening in New Zealand and Wellington. I still have to bring the book to you to find out if it's correct what he's writing about New Zealand and Wellington. But it was so funny that I was just reading the book, then I was flying to Estonia, and I was sitting next to a lady from New Zealand, and then Linnea came here from New Zealand. So it's pretty much on the map. So do you have any other questions or comments? If no, we can have some tea or coffee and cakes and just continue talking about Estonia and New Zealand. Aitäh, suur aitäh.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.